On October 2nd, 2018, Aryna Sabalenka cracked the top 20 in the world. She was nearing the end of her best WTA season to date, and over the next few years, she became one of the best tennis players in the world. But October 2nd, 2018 would be remembered globally for a very different reason. It was on that day that Saudi Arabian officials assassinated Jamal Khashoggi at a Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Jamal was a reporter for the Washington Post and stark critic of the Saudi government, publishing a monthly column in which he criticized policies of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
I think he is creating an environment of intimidation and fear. Saudis are being silenced.
Fast forward to April 3rd, 2022. Iga Swiatek reached world number 1 for the first time. Just 2 months later, Noura Al-Qatani was sentenced to 45 years in prison for criticizing the Saudi government on her X account. She had just 600 followers on the platform. Jump to September 9th, 2023, Coco Gauff won the US Open to claim her first major title. The day before, on September 8th, Saudi Arabia carried out their 100th execution of the year, and many of these executions cited vague offenses like destabilizing security and sowing discord. Saudi Arabia ranked 3rd for the most confirmed executions in 2023, with 172 total. Today, these women will travel to Saudi Arabia to compete in the 2024 year-end finals. The decision to move the WTA Finals to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia from 2024 to 2026 was a controversial one. And this is just one of several tennis events to land in the kingdom in recent years. And the kingdom's presence in tennis isn't limited to the Saudi borders. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund has partnered with the ATP and WTA tours to become the naming sponsor of their ranking systems and have their logo displayed at several big events on tour. In January 2024, Rafael Nadal was named ambassador to the Saudi Tennis Federation, a role that will see him assist in creating tennis opportunities in the region.
For me, the goal is to promote tennis all around the country and to create the infrastructure to create players growing with very positive values, education, with a team spirit, to have the possibility to practice the sport in the best way possible.
And just last month, the Six Kings Slam brought the biggest names on the ATP Tour to the kingdom for 3 days of tennis with a prize money pool in the tens of millions. These are just a few examples of the kingdom's move into pro tennis. Their growing influence is being felt with each passing month as they fast-track a plan that can make them the next big player in the sport. And the sport is responding. After the kingdom disrupted golf by creating a competitor to the PGA, the WTA and ATP tours are more or less forced into partnering if they don't want to compete with a separate pro tennis tour that can offer way more money to the players.
We are really excited to be working with PIF. It's going to be a brilliant partnership for the WTA and our players.
This is all part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, a project that dedicates over $7 trillion to diversifying their economy. They're relying on their Public Investment Fund, or PIF, to transition away from oil and into sports, tourism, technology, art, real estate, and more. Despite all the criticism, all the blowback, all the human rights violations, Saudi Arabia is strengthening their grip on pro tennis. I'm going to explain how that happened, the pros and the cons, and what this relationship could look like in years to come. This is how Saudi Arabia is taking over pro tennis. The Year-End Championships. It's an event that brings the 8 best tennis players on the planet to one location to compete for the most prestigious title on tour. This tournament hosts pro tennis's super elite. Spots are earned, the prize money is huge, there are no easy wins, and with photo shoots and interviews and huge broadcast coverage, it feels like a 5th major. And in 2024, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia was granted the right to host the WTA Tour's biggest event through 2026. The year-end finals are unique in that they change host cities every 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer. Recent hosts included London, Turin, Guadalajara, Shenzhen, and Singapore. Moving the event every few years has several advantages. For one, it allows for pro tennis to travel to growing markets, resulting in more fans getting the chance to watch the best players in the world. It also keeps prize money high. The open bidding process brings a capitalistic model to the tournament. The finals feels more like a sellable product with a rising value each time it's auctioned off. When Turin, Italy earned the right to host the ATP Finals in 2021, it beat out over 40 other bids. But for the WTA, the bidding process since 2020 has been kind of a mess. And understanding how their year-end finals ended up in Saudi Arabia really begins with understanding the 4-year saga that led up to that decision. Let's rewind. In 2018, the WTA announced a lucrative deal that would bring the WTA Finals to Shenzhen, China for 10 years, beginning in 2019. The deal was valued at $1 billion, and it meant prize money at the finals jumped to $14 million, doubling the pot from 2018. This was part of a larger plan by the WTA to increase their presence in China. The 2019 finals was a success, and more China-based events were being added to the tennis calendar.
This has solidified the investment we've made into China, and I think is showing the marketplace we're here to stay.
It looked like the country was setting itself up to be a major player in pro tennis. Then things went south. The COVID-19 pandemic cut off travel to China. 7 WTA events hosted by Chinese cities were canceled, including the 2020 Shenzhen year-end finals. The WTA's aggressive expansion into the region was brought to a screeching halt. And in 2021, the WTA Finals moved temporarily to Guadalajara as the pandemic prevented travel to China for the second straight year. On November 2nd, 2021, just 8 days before the Guadalajara Finals were set to begin, Chinese pro tennis player Peng Shuai posted a statement on Weibo, revealing that she was coerced into non-consensual sex with Chinese Vice Premier Zheng Gaoli. After the post, Peng was not seen or heard from for weeks, triggering the Where is Peng Shuai campaign. The story received worldwide attention. The WTA called for proof that she was safe. Peng appeared in a video call with the IOC weeks later and claimed that the accusations against Gaoli were false and that there had been many misunderstandings about the post. The WTA, and really the world, didn't receive assurances of her safety. The tour announced that they would not hold tournaments in China until Peng Shuai was proven safe. That never happened, and it was the final nail in the coffin. The WTA's billion-dollar deal to host the finals in Shenzhen was dead. The tour scrambled to find cities that would host the finals, landing in Dallas in 2022 and Cancun in 2023. And those 2 events were PR nightmares, with last-minute planning preventing large crowds and weather wreaking havoc on matches in Cancun. Criticism rained down on the WTA. A perfect storm had caused disorder and chaos surrounding what was supposed to be the WTA's showpiece event. That's where Saudi Arabia comes in. During 2023, there were rumblings that the kingdom was looking to host the WTA Finals. By this point, the kingdom had made some inroads into pro tennis by hosting the ATP Next Gen Finals and a few exhibitions, but they'd never hosted an official WTA Tour event. In the end, it was Saudi Arabia who earned the right to host the WTA Finals through 2026. The WTA released a statement in April of 2024 explaining that a partnership with the Saudi Tennis Federation to host the finals satisfied 3 main goals: deliver and fund a world-class event, increase prize money, and commit to growing the WTA Finals and the sport over time. $15.25 million in total prize money was announced for the 2024 finals, equaling what the men earned at their year-end finals in Turin. This was a huge increase from 2023, where total prize money was $9 million. The deal also guaranteed increases in prize money in 2025 and 2026. So, in my opinion, the WTA could have secured more money given the hundreds of millions of dollars Saudi Arabia paid other individual athletes, but I'll get into that a little bit later. The statement also explained that the Saudi Tennis Federation and the WTA would continue to grow and market the sport in the Middle East. This includes philanthropic programs through the WTA Foundation, increased marketing in the region, and providing tennis opportunities to young people, specifically young girls, over the next several years. Despite the massive pay increase and plans to grow the sport, the decision received backlash. In the intro to this video, I mentioned some human rights violations carried out by Saudi Arabia. These were just a few examples that explain why the kingdom is perceived so poorly by the outside world. And that perception is reflected by Human Rights Watch, a human rights advocacy group. The overview of the kingdom on their website reads, Saudi Arabia spends billions of dollars hosting major entertainment, cultural, and sporting events to deflect from the country's poor human rights record. Saudi Arabia has announced important reforms, but the repression of independent civil society and critical voices impedes any attempt at reform. Scores of human rights activists and dissidents are in prison or on trial for their peaceful criticism. So I have to add that you can actually find around 100 countries listed on Human Rights Watch, including Czech Republic, the Netherlands, France, and the United States actually has an entire section of the website dedicated to it with multiple categories covered. Human Rights Watch is a great website to browse if you want to uncover human rights violations around the world. Saudi Arabia is one of many countries with poor records on the site. But the repression faced by peaceful protesters in Saudi Arabia and the fact that sporting events were mentioned in the first sentence of that blurb are the main takeaways. Dozens of Saudi citizens who criticize their policies have faced imprisonment. And given their historically poor treatment of women, the choice by the WTA to bring the most popular women's sport on the planet to the kingdom was seen as strange.
It's a complicated issue, but I think one thing that I think we shouldn't lose sight of is that 30 months ago, the WTA pulled its business out of China, including the year-end event. Why? Because, and I will quote Steve Simon, the CEO at the time here, if powerful people can suppress the voices of women, the basis on which the WTA was founded, WTA would suffer an immense setback. So that was 30 months ago, and now we are going to a country that ranks, I think it's 131 out of 146 on a gender gap, where there is no penal code, where homosexuality is criminalized. It's really problematic.
Saudi Arabia is a patriarchal society that has viewed women largely as second-class citizens. Women weren't allowed to drive until 2018, and they couldn't work or travel without a male guardian's approval until 2019. And today, women still need a male guardian's permission to marry. The male is the automatic legal guardian of the child, and in the event of separation, he remains the child's legal guardian regardless of any circumstances. If a woman refuses to have sex with, travel with, or live with her husband, he can withdraw financial support. And as the automatic breadwinner of the household, this can have massive repercussions for Saudi women. A lot of people assume that the repression of Saudi women is a result of Saudi Arabia being an Islamic country. And while this is partly true, it's a little more complex than blaming it all on religion. It has something to do with how this region was settled in the 6th and 7th centuries. Nomadic Bedouin tribes dominated the region before the rise of Islam in the 630s. These tribes viewed women as property, often using them as bartering tools. Around 610, Muhammad began spreading Islamic beliefs to these tribes, and over the next 1,000 years, interpretations of the Quran by these tribes and local authorities have justified keeping women as second-class citizens. The conservative social climate in Saudi Arabia also has a lot to do with the ultra-conservative Wahhabi movement and their role in helping the Al Saud family gain control over the area in the 1930s. Since then, the royal family has enforced those ultra-conservative beliefs in the kingdom. Now, this is an overly simplified explanation, but it might offer some insight into why women in Saudi Arabia are treated so poorly, while other Islamic nations offer their women much broader rights. If you want to read more about how Islamic law relates to women, this article is a great resource and taught me a lot about the subject. So now that you know a little bit about their history and their treatment of women, you might understand why the nation is trying to rebrand in order to diversify their economy. And one way to fast-track a nation's rebranding is with sports, which brings us to the topic of sports washing. If you followed Saudi Arabia's journey into the world of sports, you've probably heard this term.
Sports washing is when an authoritarian regime uses a major sporting event like the World Cup or the Olympics as a method of distraction for its crimes it may be committing against its populace. Like in Saudi Arabia, for example, seeing the importance of sports as a way to put the happiest possible face on their regime, as a way to say, we are part of the modern world, we are part of the international community, and we should be given that respect.
Examples of sports washing can be found in Russia, China, even the United States. And when a country uses something as widely loved as sport, it can help distract from other uglier happenings in the country.
Yemenis have grown used to Saudi attacks. The war, it seems, never ends. And now, a new cycle of violence has started in this proxy war between regional powers.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about Saudi Arabia's past and why they might be turning to sports to modernize, But now let's look into how they began buying a stake in pro tennis. Most importantly, Saudi Arabia's presence in tennis is made possible by their huge Public Investment Fund, or PIF. PIF is known as a sovereign wealth fund, a government-owned fund used to benefit a country's economy and citizens.
Driving change and making impactful investments to create a better world.
This fund is part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, a comprehensive and far-reaching plan to diversify their economy and invest in the global market, to make the kingdom a global leader. According to their Vision 2030 website, PIF accelerates innovation, reinvents industries, creates jobs, and grows Saudi Arabia's economy. It has around $925 billion in assets under management, and its main purpose is to wean Saudi Arabia's economy off of oil. PIF powers Vision 2030. Basically, this fund is dedicated to adding a bunch of assets to their economy that don't involve oil, tennis included. In 2018, we saw Saudi Arabia's first reach into modern pro tennis. Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic confirmed their participation in the King Salman Tennis Championship, an exhibition event scheduled for December 2018. Roger Federer revealed that he had turned down an offer, saying he, quote, didn't want to play there at that time. Novak and Rafa would never play that match though. As news circulated about Jamal Khashoggi's assassination, the two men said they were reconsidering. Eventually, the match was called off due to a minor ankle injury Nadal sustained. And then in 2019, Saudi Arabia staged their first pro tennis exhibition, the WTA Cup in Riyadh. This was an exhibition featuring big names in men's tennis, including Daniil Medvedev, Fabio Fognini, John Isner, Gael Monfils, and Stan Wawrinka.
It's our pleasure to host everyone in Saudi, and especially in Diriyah, and to also accommodate 8 of the top 20 players in the world of tennis in our first event is a very step forward for the sport of tennis in Saudi. It's our first international matches in Saudi that hopefully we can showcase what Saudi Arabia can do in the world of sports.
Medvedev won the event, taking home $1 million in prize money. A few years later, in June of 2022, the WTA confirmed that Saudi Arabia had contacted them to express interest in bringing tour events to the region, specifically the WTA Finals. Later that year, the second edition of the WTA Cup hosted more big names in men's tennis, in what Amnesty International described as the latest jamboree of Saudi sportswashing. Also in 2022, Saudi Arabia launched their version of the PGA Tour, Live Golf. It was that tour, the Live Tour, that marked a milestone push by the kingdom to break into sports. The money they were offering some of these players was absurd.
Masters champ Jon Rahm has agreed to leave the PGA Tour for the Live Golf League. Rahm's deal is believed to be longer than 3 years and worth more than $300 million.
I don't want to skip through this point because there's no point. A big change in the way the golfers get compensated. I'll be lying if I said it wasn't a big part of it. In a nutshell, I'm getting paid more to play the same sport and have more time. I don't know about most people, that sounds great to me.
So for context, Novak Djokovic holds the record for most prize money earned in tennis at $184 million over 20 years. The money Saudi Arabia was throwing into golf was dividing the sports world. And it wasn't just golf either. Saudi Arabia was offering big paydays to soccer players too. It's estimated that Cristiano Ronaldo earns over $200 million a year through his salary with Saudi team Al Nassr. So this is why I think the WTA Finals, a tournament featuring the 8 biggest names in women's tennis, could have pulled in more than $15 million in total prize money to split between all the women. I personally think they could have doubled that. The kingdom hosted boxing matches, WWE events, the Esports World Cup, glitzy F1 races. Saudi Arabia's involvement in the sports world from 2017 to 2022 had ramped up considerably, and it looked like tennis was their next big prospect. By 2023, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia was hosting the ATP Next Gen Finals, and even more rumors were circulating that the sport was headed to the kingdom.
Jeddah, you know, it looks great. Now we're in the old town.
First time for me, so it's very nice to be here and a new experience for me, new country.
But it was 2024 when things really gained steam. In January, Rafael Nadal was announced as ambassador for the Saudi Tennis Federation, a role that would give him the opportunity to develop an academy in the kingdom.
My goal here is to create something that the people here in Saudi feel proud about it, not only to have events, but have create the infrastructure to create players, to see them later grow in the future.
In February, the ATP signed a $100 million 5-year deal with Saudi Arabia's public investment fund that included naming rights to their ranking system. In March, the PIF logo was given prime visibility at 2 of the biggest events on tour, Indian Wells and Miami. And a month after announcing that Riyadh would host the year-end finals, the WTA Tour revealed a multi-year partnership with PIF that made them the naming sponsor for the WTA rankings, just like the men did.
So we are seeing incredible growth in women's sport in Saudi Arabia, and that's why we are incredibly thrilled to be bringing our premier event to Riyadh. And we are very proud and very excited that many of our WTA players, both current and also legends, really want to get involved in the community to inspire the next generation of athletes.
These decisions were made despite an opinion piece written by Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert denouncing any plans for Saudi involvement in women's tennis. An excerpt from the article reads, "We competed in an era of critical social causes, from women's rights to civil rights to apartheid to LGBTQ+ rights, that demanded the ethical consideration of others. The WTA must stand for human rights so long as inequality for women exists in the world. We offer this from our experiences. A champion is carved not just from trophies or earnings, but from the decision to surrender comfort and luxury, to make hard choices and take principled stands." Chris and Martina had long been staunch opponents to tennis's involvement with the kingdom, and I don't think it was a coincidence that they published their article in the Washington Post. They weren't the only critics either. Andy Murray revealed that he had turned down offers to play in Saudi Arabia and wouldn't play there in the future. And at Wimbledon back in 2023, Daria Kasatkina said, "Well, yes, a tough condition, many issues concerning this country. Honestly, tough to talk about. It's easier for the men because they feel pretty good there, let's say. We don't feel the same way, so it's going to be, let's say, money talks in our world right now. For me, I don't think that everything is about the money. Unfortunately, not everything is dependent just on us, and particularly me, for example." For Daria, going to Saudi Arabia could mean threats to her life. As a gay woman, she'd risk her own safety by traveling to the kingdom where homosexuality is still punishable by death. There are people in the world of tennis who support the move to Saudi Arabia, though. Nick Kyrgios tweeted, "Sign me up." Later that year, he told The Athletic that he'd be the first to leave the ATP for a Saudi breakaway tour, saying he'd, quote, "just let the ATP ship sink." Billie Jean King, in a surprising admission, also supported the move to Saudi Arabia. She explained that engagement leads to change, and that taking tennis to Saudi Arabia would help improve the quality of life for women there. Rafael Nadal showed his support by accepting the role of ambassador for the Saudi Tennis Federation. There aren't details on how much he was paid for this role, but like I mentioned, we do know it includes plans to build a Rafa Nadal Academy in the kingdom. I'd assume that academy would be funded by the Saudis. If Rafa is building an academy in Saudi Arabia, he was probably assured that pro tennis would be growing there significantly. So Rafa isn't the only Spanish tennis legend to endorse Saudi Arabia's move into tennis. Garbine Muguruza accepted the role of tournament director for the WTA year-end finals. Having a former player named tournament director undoubtedly helped convince current players that the WTA Finals in Saudi Arabia was safe and legitimate. That's another hurdle the Saudis had to overcome, managing players' perception of the kingdom. This was done in part by Princess Rima bint Bandar Al Saud, the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Princess Rima is the great-granddaughter of Ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Princess Rima has played a large role in managing perception of Saudi Arabia, specifically their treatment of women. She released a statement in response to Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova's Washington Post article, saying, "To those who seek to deny our women the same opportunities that others enjoy, I say that what I hear loudly and clearly is that there is no seat for me at their table." Just a reminder, Martina Navratilova defected from communist Czechoslovakia when she was just 18 and spent the majority of her life advocating for human rights.
LGBTI people count and cannot be discriminated against is huge, and one day we will destroy this violence and prejudice and discrimination against gays, and this is a step in that right direction.
Chris Evert serves as chairperson for the USTA Foundation and also works to provide tennis opportunities to those who may otherwise be left out.
A great opportunity to give to these kids, these underserved kids who don't normally have the opportunities. We have a lot of after-school programs. We have 250 after-school programs around the country.
A large part of their career is seeking out and providing opportunities for women and people in the margins. They've dedicated their lives to it. And if you're wondering about those improvements Saudi Arabia made for women, let me just read a few excerpts from their recently codified personal status law, which was touted as a win for women's rights and freedoms. Neither spouse shall abstain from sexual intercourse or childbearing except with the consent of the other party. The wife must obey according to what is reasonable and breastfeed their children unless there is an impediment. Every person's expenses are from his own money, except for the wife, whose expenses are the responsibility of her husband, even if she is well off. The wife's right to maintenance is forfeited if she prevents herself from the husband, or refuses to move to the marital home, spend the night in it, or travel with the husband without a legitimate excuse. Divorce is the dissolution of the marriage contract by the will of the husband, expressed in words. The wife's statement in a divorce or reconsideration suit is not accepted unless there is evidence. So those are excerpts taken directly from the personal status law, and you can interpret them however you choose. Princess Rima isn't the only PR tool that the Saudis are using. Turki Al-Sheikh is the chairman of Saudi Arabia's General Entertainment Authority, a role created by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Al-Sheikh's net worth is in the billions, and he's the man responsible for most of the kingdom's cultural advancements in entertainment. He brought cinemas to Saudi Arabia in 2018, organized sporting events, and brought lots of stars to the region. He was also the point person for the Six Kings Slam, an over-the-top exhibition event featuring 6 of the biggest names in men's tennis. This event was marketed like a Marvel film, and Turki Al-Sheikh was there the whole time, posing with the players, sitting courtside, and receiving flowery declarations of gratitude from the players throughout the event. The exo took place in Riyadh, with the winner taking home $6 million in prize money. This is on top of the $1.5 million each player received just for competing in the event. Daniil Medvedev only played 1 match and lost in 1 hour and 9 minutes. He won 3 games, and this performance translates to about $21,000 a minute. For context, the biggest champion's check in tennis is $3.6 million at the US Open. To earn that, you have to win 7 straight matches over 2 weeks. The winner of the Six Kings Slam earned twice that amount for less than half the effort. And that's really what this all comes down to: money. Saudi Arabia has been using their wealth to invest all over the world for years. They've quietly invested in companies like Walmart, Amazon, Uber, Live Nation, and more. And with the ATP and WTA discussing a shakeup in the form of a tour merger, the Saudis have a perfect in to influence the new model. Tennis is looking to restructure, and the kingdom can pay for that infrastructure. They can also guarantee more prize money for the players, something that the WTA has been trying to accomplish for years. I think that's the biggest upside of taking tennis to the kingdom: money. But what will they want in return? More events in the kingdom? More time on the calendar? I mean, you have to assume that some long-standing events would get demoted if the Saudis claimed time on the already congested calendar. Take January, for example. If the kingdom wanted to add a 1,000 level event in that month, Tennis Australia would have to relinquish Australian Open lead-up events in Brisbane, Perth, Auckland, and Sydney. A huge blow to their long-standing organization. But like Daria Kasatkina said, money talks. And Saudi Arabia has the money to shake things up if they really want to. In my opinion, tennis players will largely support this. The earning window for a tennis player is small. After their career winds down in their mid-30s, there are only a few ways for a former pro to make money, which is why a huge influx of cash is a welcome opportunity to provide a sort of safety blanket after their playing career ends. Only a few players are declining the opportunity to travel to the kingdom. One of those players is Casper Ruud, who said this about the offer he received to play in Saudi Arabia.
But I've had offers in the past and I've chosen not to go. It is obviously a controversial country in terms of many things, but You know, there are other countries that also are controversial that we go to and we play in. Definitely discuss about China, human rights in China, but we go there every year. Obviously, they have a lot of money. Athletes going there could lead to a change, who knows? And I know that I might look very naive saying this because, you know, people will say, oh, well, that's just sport washing, covering up what's actually going on. But if they never start anywhere, I'm not sure if there will ever be a change. So I've chosen not to go so far, but it seems to me that it's inevitable that they will somehow be big in tennis in the future, and they already have the next gen finals, so let's see what the future brings.
Saudi Arabia's influence on the world is already happening. Their Vision 2030 is in full swing. They've invested in dozens of international organizations, and now tennis has landed in their crosshairs. I predict their involvement will only increase over the next 10 years, and we'll see events appear in the kingdom like they have in other Middle Eastern countries like Qatar and the UAE. So I hope that with the integration of pro sports comes more opportunities for previously marginalized people in Saudi Arabia. It's just a shame that those opportunities aren't given to countries with less wealth. As Ken Turner said, talent is equally distributed. Opportunity is not. While I'm glad more women are being granted opportunity, I also realize that that opportunity could have been granted to those women much sooner given the massive wealth of the country in which they live. This is about the bottom line. The only reason Saudi Arabia is modernizing is because the well is running dry. They have to use their trillions of dollars to fast-track change. Renewables are taking over, and they know that if they don't find new revenue streams, they'll suffer in the long run. But do they deserve to bypass the repercussions of their repressive policies? How are they paying for the hundreds of people executed in the last 3 years? Or the women imprisoned for calling for the change the kingdom claims to be making? There's an argument to be made to withhold a service or product as leverage to incite change. Use the WTA, ATP, pro sports as a bartering tool. Don't go there until these things change and there's proof of that change. Going to the kingdom while injustices still exist seems like a cart before the horse model and is incredibly risky. But then again, if you don't play ball with the Saudis, they have the money to create a competing tour and make appeals to some of the biggest names in tennis. If they want, they could capitalize on these individual athletes' small earning window and make them split from the WTA or ATP tour altogether. The only thing stopping them would be that individual's moral obligation to withhold their services from an oppressive regime. At the end of the day, I'm cautiously optimistic about Saudi Arabia's involvement in sports. More eyes on the kingdom will conceivably pressure them to change any oppressive behavior. And I hope they use their seat at the table for good and don't ultimately monopolize the world of pro tennis or the world of pro sports.